We're going to start off the list with this image here. This is not one of those niche taxidermy pieces. This is indeed a living two-headed dog, pieced together by a mad scientist. Vladimir Demikov was a scientist from the Soviet Union who did some really questionable stuff back in the 50s. He came up with this strange idea of attaching the head of one dog onto another, creating a two-headed dog. Now, why? Well, he wanted to figure out more about organ transplants and see how the body would react to these surgeries. From a pure scientific perspective, what he did was kind of a big deal. It was about pushing the limits of what doctors could do back then. But is it incredibly creepy and unethical? Absolutely. This sparked a huge ethical debate. Seemed like some bizarre freak show rather than an ethical scientific pursuit, and people got pretty upset about it. Playing around with life like that, creating these weird creatures just for the sake of curiosity, it didn't sit well with a lot of folks, and unsurprisingly, the dogs didn't live very long after these experiments. So while Demikov's work was kind of groundbreaking, it was also just downright cruel. You know what's downright cruel to us is if you don't subscribe to this channel. I mean, what are you waiting for? It's free. We got awesome videos coming your way on the daily, so don't miss out. Hit that button down below. Next up, we have this image here of Captain Robert Falcon Scott and his team of explorers after finally reaching the South Pole. It had been a long, grueling, treacherous expedition, and they'd arrived only to find out that a Norwegian team of explorers had beaten them to the punch. Not only were these men now exhausted, starving, and frostbitten, but they wouldn't even be remembered as the team to reach the South Pole first, and now they had to make the long return trip back to base camp. You can see how miserable and distraught they all look here, not to mention very unwell. Definitely frostbitten. Tragically, the team would never make it home alive. The weather was harsh, they were already suffering from exhaustion, and they were running out of supplies. The first member of the team to pass was Edgar Evans, who died on February 17th of 1912. Then Lawrence Oates willingly walked out into a blizzard, ending his own life. Scott, along with Edward Wilson, Henry Bowers, and Edgar Evans, kept going, but things got worse. A storm ended up trapping them in their tent for 9 whole days, and they couldn't move. They died in the tent, just 11 miles away from where they could get more supplies.
Number 7, adhesive bras. We'll liven this up a little bit with some vintage history it's kind of funny. It's pretty funny. Let's talk about sticky bras, shall we? What a mess this was, oh my. Back in 1949, Life magazine released an article that caught everybody's attention, obviously. This was news. This was like a new technology that was being announced. It was May 16th, 1949, and the article read, "For 5,000 years, clothes have been draped, tied, buttoned, pinned, and buckled on the human form. This year, for the first time in history, drumroll, they will be glued on." What in the world? How? This is witchcraft. How did that happen? Just 1, 2, that's it? That's easy. Inventor Charles Langs changed the game, or he thought he did, in 1949. He made these bra cups that would stick to you with adhesive. This, special glue. This specific adhesive was promised to leave behind no residue. It was supposed to be painless, yet at the same time, stay glued on even if you were to jump into a pool from a 10-foot diving board. That was the sell. Yeah, well, that's not true. That's definitely not true. Well, Langs ended up selling the company to Textron later on, and the product ultimately failed. Number 6, nuclear site list. All right, back to the dark stuff. Here on Most Amazing, we love lists, right? I'm not sure if you can tell. Smash that thumbs up, hit subscribe, yada yada. We love it. But apparently, the US government also fancies a list or two. Who thought? Back when Obama was still running the show, a report was delivered to Congress, or rather, it was supposed to be. The 266-page report featuring, every nook and cranny about the US nuclear program. It was released publicly on the government printing office's website in draft form. Draft form, couldn't have been easier, just a casual PDF that shows us maps with stockpiled fuel used for nuclear warheads. Awesome, right next to your resume. Imagine that, so convenient. How does this even happen? I thought this type of stuff could never happen, right? Well, MIT professor John M. Deutsch said that these screw-ups do of course happen, and it's normal, and this one here isn't a serious breach. I mean, it certainly sounds serious, but okay. we'll just have to trust the government. Number 5, UFOs in the ocean. This video here was leaked in the last couple of years. You've probably seen it, hopefully not. This would be a great day. The footage itself was recorded in 2019 in San Diego. Now the Pentagon has since of course confirmed its authenticity, and the UAP, the unidentified aerial phenomenon here, is sphere-shaped and it's flying at extremely high speeds. There's no exhaust, no propulsion system whatsoever. It's just a metal ball whipping by San Diego, and now we're questioning our beliefs, so that's fun. The sphere vanished into the water afterwards, into the ocean, and then was never seen ever again. Number 4, radar footage. Now normally when we see leaked footage, be it of UAPs or leaked documents, whatever, it's always the worst quality. Like that one, not the best, right? Not quite 4K. It's hard to believe when military footage is poor quality, right? Like how can we see photos of black holes and not even have a photo of a UAP yet, right? What's going on here? Well, Jeremy Corbell, he's here to help. Jeremy? What if he just walked in? That would be crazy. He's not here. That's insane. Jeremy took to Twitter in May 2021 sharing footage of US Navy ships being swarmed by UFOs. Like more than one. Sorry, UAPs. We're not gonna call them that anymore. Now this time we have radar footage, and that's pretty sweet. That's different. It came from the Combat Information Center aboard the USS Omaha. The 46-second clip was originally recorded July 15th, 2019. You can even hear people in the background reacting to what's happening in real time. You hear panic in their voices. These military personnel in the background, you can overhear them talking about how fast the objects are moving on the radar. So, seems very believable this time, right? It's not just a grainy footage. It's like a live reaction kind of. And if he's spooked, we're spooked, right? Number 3, Watergate. I have to include Watergate, right? It's one of the biggest scandals in US history. Right in the middle of 1972, there were 5 men who were all arrested for breaking into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C. It was clear that they intended on bugging the place, right? It was fishy, it was obvious, they looked like spy kids, right? They were up to no good. Now as the year went on, the election came closer and closer, and all of a sudden out of the woodwork comes this anonymous source who fed information to Washington Post that the Watergate bugging incident was a massive campaign of political spying and sabotage kicked off by none other than President Nixon himself. It was kicked off by his re-election and directed by officials of the White House. It was a whole planned thing. Now despite this information leak and it being reported to the news, Nixon was still re-elected. Now these men were clearly linked to a fundraising group for Nixon, but his administration just kept denying any involvement, right? That's the key. Deny, deny, deny. It wasn't until later that year in 1972 when reporters Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, they came forward and exposed everything. Now we got the truth. They exposed the administrator's role in the entire scandal, how they had an inside source, an FBI agent named Mark Felt. It was a whole thing. This ultimately led to Nixon resigning in 1974, the first ever president to do so. Yeah, that's how you know you got caught, when you have to resign. Know what I mean? Number 2, shadow brokers. Back in August 2016, a group named the Shadow Brokers were the talk of the town. And with that name, how can you not be, right? The shadow brokers would steal cyber weapons from an NSA hacking unit and then proceed to sell them online to the highest bidder. Now this sounds made up. This sounds like it's from a movie. This is crazy, right? Now these tools in question, these cyber weapons, they've been used by many countries and many not so great sounding schemes. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, you name it, these cyber attacks can happen anywhere, right? The 2019 ransomware cyber attack, that's one example. This incident was connected to the shadow brokers. So whoever this mysterious group is, it still remains a mystery and still sounds made up as shit. It sounds like a DC Comics villain. It's insane. And finally, number 1, motorized roller skates. We'll end on a fun one, because, you know, why not? This last one they've been working on for a very long time and we still can't crack it, right? This is the craziest thing I've ever seen working on this channel, so I gotta end with it. Motorized roller skates, what a nightmare this would be. Imagine if this worked out. Even Elon Musk would see this and be like, no, that's crazy. This photo was taken at the Sunoco station in Hartford, Connecticut. Now context aside, this is an odd one. A guy with a briefcase is filling up at the gas station and he's wearing roller skates. That would look bad today. You would have SWAT teams rolling up if you saw that, right? It's 1956 and that futuristic looking man right there is Mike Dreschler. Now at the time he was working for a Detroit skate company, but he was very close to gas powered skates. They would have cost around $250, which today is around $2,400. And its max speed was 17 miles an hour. Again, imagine that in the closing act of like a Mission Impossible movie. That's crazy. Now obviously the public wasn't supposed to see this. They feared that it would encourage folks to get creative on their own and, you know, launch their way to work. So yeah, don't make rocket skates with gasoline. Thanks.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have The Fire. This is a photo that comes to us from 2003 at the Station nightclub in Rhode Island, and it shows the band Great White as they perform. While this seems like just a regular photo that someone took on their Motorola Razr, what ensued shortly after this photo was taken is absolutely tragic. Basically, as the band performed, there were some pyrotechnics that were set off, and while this was meant to be a spectacular display, it only ended up in disaster. The fireworks ended up setting all of the flammable acoustic foam in the walls and ceiling on fire, and within 1 minute, everything that was combustible was up in flames. Within 2 minutes, the entire club was fully engulfed in black smoke, and people were having trouble finding exits. In the end, this fire took the lives of 100 people, and another 230 were injured as a result. It has gone down in US history as one of the worst and most deadly nightclub fires. In our number 9 spot today, we have The Core. This photo shows a physicist named Harold New, and while this looks like a relatively normal, non-threatening photo, what he has in his hand is truly devastating. Harold is holding the nuclear core of what was nicknamed the Fat Man atomic bomb. This means that Harold is holding the nuclear core of the atomic bomb that was later dropped on Nagasaki in 1945. The immediate blast, of course, took many lives, but so did the long-term effects of the bomb, like radiation illnesses and that sort of thing. It's crazy to look at a photo like this because it seems so perfectly normal when he literally has a life-changing, world-ending device in the palm of his hand. Also, I don't think I could ever hold something like that. Not only would I just not want to, but I don't think I could even get near it for fear of something going wrong. In our number 8 spot today, we have The Eruption. This is a photo that is showing Mount Pinatubo, which is located in the Philippines on June 15th, 1991. That is the day that this volcano erupted into what would be the second largest volcanic eruption of the 20th century. Certainly impressive, also extremely terrifying. This photo shows the pyroclastic flow full of hot gas and rock being flung into the air. Eruptive activity in the volcano first started on April 2nd of that year, which prompted researchers to set up seismographs in the area. By June, the volcano was having a group of progressively shallower eruptions before, on June 12th, the volcano had its first spectacular eruption, which sent an ash column 19 kilometers up into the atmosphere. Additional smaller explosions continued on June 13th, which then led to some intense seismic activity. After more highly gas-charged magma reached the surface, on June 15th, the volcano once again exploded, this time sending the cloud of ash 40 kilometers up into the atmosphere. Volcanic ash and pumice blanketed the surrounding areas, and pyroclastic flows filled what were once deep valleys with fresh volcanic deposits. It is truly magnificent and extremely powerful, and this photo shows just that.
This is a photograph taken in 1986 of what were known as the Chernobyl liquidators. See those white stripes, the patterns at the bottom of this photo? That was caused by radiation on the film. The Chernobyl liquidators were a group of people who were called in to clean up the mess after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986. Their job was to try and make things safer for dealing with the radioactive contamination. These were regular folks, soldiers, firefighters, and other workers who faced really dangerous conditions to help control the aftermath. These workers had to deal with high levels of radiation, and many of them got sick later on due to exposure. They didn't have fancy gear like we might see today. In fact, there wasn't even enough protective equipment for everyone, so some of them had to construct their own out of leather and lead plates. It was an incredibly tough and risky job, and they faced severe health consequences because of it. Some, of course, even died because of the exposure. Alright, this is a pretty famous photograph in the world of paranormal photography, and for good reason. This picture has a pretty chilling tale behind it. It's a very classic kind of ghost story. Back in 1924, during a routine voyage, tragedy struck the SS Watertown when 2 crew members, James Courtney and Michael Meehan, lost their lives and were buried at sea. 2 men had been sent to the ship's interior cofferdam to clean and do repairs, but they were unaware there was poisonous gas leaking into the area they were working in, and they died inhaling the fumes. What followed was this series of events that would go down in maritime history as one of the eeriest tales ever told by seafarers. After the burial, the remaining crew reported an unsettling sight. They claimed to see ghostly faces appearing in the water alongside the ship, and the faces looked just like Courtney and Meehan. One crew member managed to snap the famous photo that is now infamous, seemingly revealing their ghostly faces in the water. Alright, want to see part of the underground hideout of a Russian doomsday cult? Well, you're looking at it. This is one of those images you can kind of smell just by looking at. Never a good thing. Pyotr Kuznetsov led a strange group called the True Russian Orthodox Church. And in 2007, he convinced his followers to barricade themselves inside a cave. Kuznetsov wasn't with them because police had him in custody. He claimed to be a prophet, combining Christian teachings with visions of the world ending. So why did they hide in a cave? Well, they genuinely thought the world was about to end, and by shutting themselves away, they believed they could shield themselves from the apocalypse. The police found out where the cave was, but the people inside threatened to harm themselves if the police tried to step in, and after a few months, yes, months, spent in that cave, the Russian security forces finally stepped in. 2 members had actually already died in the cave and were creating dangerous fumes for the folks that were still alive. Awful. Eventually, though, they were hauled out of there. Does this look like a place you'd want to spend the night in? Probably not. It's run down, clearly abandoned. It'd probably be squatters, and there's no furniture. But even worse than all of that, this is said to be one of the most haunted places in Italy. In the quiet village of Cona stands an abandoned house known as Villa Magnoni, left vacant and untouched now for many years. Its windows, aside from one, are completely sealed up. Back in the late 80s, a group of curious young men decided to venture into this abandoned mansion. They actually managed to break in, but once inside, they heard something. It was the distant sound of children singing. At least that's what it sounded like, and it was seemingly coming from the garden. They went outside to investigate, but when they got there, it was completely empty. As they were looking around, an old woman suddenly appeared in the window above them in the house. She scolded and insulted them, demanding they leave the premises immediately. The teenagers did the smart thing and hastily booked it out of there, but just after they'd hopped into their car and began peeling off, they got into an accident. 3 of them ended up losing their lives in the crash, leaving only 1 survivor. In the aftermath, the villagers took the precautions and sealed off all the windows of Villa Magnoni, believing someone or something dark was lingering inside the property. Weeks later, they discovered that the covering on one specific window, the very one where the old woman had appeared to scold and curse the boys, was mysteriously uncovered. This is one of the last photos taken of the Apollo 1 crew on the day a deadly fire erupted during a pre-launch test. All 3 astronauts lost their lives. On January 27th of 1967, during a pre-launch test for the Apollo program, the crew of Apollo 1, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee, were conducting a test at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The spacecraft was mounted on its launch vehicle. The purpose of the test was to check the spacecraft's systems and conditions, simulating a launch with external power sources disconnected. During the test, though, the crew encountered an issue. A fire broke out in the pure oxygen environment of the command module's cabin. The fire spread incredibly fast because of the highly flammable materials that were used at the time to construct the spacecraft. This is one of the last known photographs taken of a man named Michael Rockefeller, the son of New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, who never returned home from an expedition to Dutch New Guinea, now part of Indonesia, in 1961. Michael was on a mission to study the Asmat people, an indigenous tribe known for their unique art and customs, and while on an art collecting expedition along the coast, Michael's boat capsized. He and a fellow explorer, Rene Wassing, tried to swim to the shore, which was about 12 miles away, but Wassing eventually became too exhausted, and Michael decided he was going to continue swimming alone, hoping to reach help. But Michael would never be seen again. Now, the famous theory is that the very tribe seen with him in this photograph ate him. Now, although cannibalism was still a bit of a thing in some areas of Asmat at the time, there's not a whole lot of evidence for that. It just makes for a sensational kind of story. There's another possibility that he was attacked by sharks or just succumbed to exhaustion. This is a photograph taken inside Waverly Hills Sanitarium in Kentucky Kentucky, a hospital that became famous for treating patients suffering from tuberculosis. So yeah, a lot of people died there. It opened in 1910 to treat people with the deadly lung disease. Back then there wasn't a cure for tuberculosis, so the sanitarium focused on providing fresh air and sunlight, thinking it might help patients get better. As the years went by, better treatments for tuberculosis came along, and the need for places like Waverly Hills decreased. The sanitarium eventually closed in 1961. After that, it went through various uses. It was an old folks home for a short time. Nothing really stuck though. Now, what makes Waverly Hills famous, or maybe infamous, is its reputation for being very haunted. Over the years, people started to tell stories about strange things happening there. Glowing orbs, the sounds of disembodied coughs, footsteps making their way down the empty halls. One of the most famous stories is about a ghostly figure named Timmy. According to the tale, Timmy was a little boy who stayed at Waverly Hills and died there. People claim to have heard a child's laughter and seen a shadowy figure resembling a young boy. Because of all these stories, Waverly Hills has become pretty popular for ghost hunters. There have even been TV shows and documentaries filmed there. And finally, we have Mayenga Nasaka. Mayenga Nasaka was a nurse in Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, during a scary time in 1976, the Ebola outbreak. This photo captures one of the last moments of her life. Mayenga got infected with the Ebola virus while she was working at Mambalat Hospital in Kinshasa. She was caring for a nun who'd been brought in from Yambuku Mission Hospital where the outbreak started. The thing is, Mayenga's case became kind of famous because she was one of the first healthcare workers to get sick during the outbreak. In the picture, you can see her standing next to another nurse taking care of a patient, but here's the heartbreaking part. Just a few days after this photo was taken, Mayenga passed away. Hospital staff didn't have the right gear to protect themselves, and there weren't enough precautions to stop them from coming into contact with patients' blood or fluids. This was the very early stages of the outbreak, and people didn't know how dangerous the virus really was at the time.
Starting off this countdown, we have experimental electrical stimulation. Taken in 1856, this photo shows a man undergoing an experiment with electrical stimulation. And by the looks of it, it was quite painful. So back then, they would use the stimulation for a number of reasons. 1, to manipulate and experiment on one's nervous system, and 2, to treat certain diseases and disorders. Nowadays, this treatment is much safer. They use it to help with injured muscles or manipulate nerves to reduce pain. But back then, they were still trying to get it right. So it makes you wonder how many people underwent these painful experiments, and how many people were accidentally killed before they found the correct voltage to use. In our 9th spot today, we have the lipstick killer. And if you're liking this video so far, then smash that like button because it really helps us out. William George Herons was an American criminal and potential serial killer that confessed to be the lipstick killer. The lipstick killer was someone who took the lives of a number of women and would often leave a creepy message at the scene of the crime in lipstick. That's how he got the name, Lipstick Killer. The photo I'm about to share with you was a creepy message that he left at the scene of one of his crimes in 1945. He wrote, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself." Now this message is creepy for a number of reasons. First, you got a man on the loose who can't control his impulses and he just admitted it. And second, look how creepy it just looks with the lipstick smeared everywhere and such. It took the police 6 more months from the time this message was written to finally catch William. This photo is just a scary and dark reminder of the horrors this man committed. Moving on to number 8, we have the poverty. This photo from 1948 shows just how bad poverty was in the 1940s to 50s in America. This is when the poverty rate was at its highest. In this photo, Mr. and Miss Ray Shalafo were facing eviction from their Chicago apartment. They were so desperate for money that they had to sell their kids. Now this photo was a staged photo, but it still shows a heartbroken mother not knowing what else to do. Within 2 years, all 4 kids were sold into different homes. It also sheds the light on how different laws were back then. Nowadays, that is very much illegal to do. Anyways, this is a very heartbreaking photo. Like, I can't imagine what that family went through.
In our number 7 spot today, we have post-war. This is a photo that is said to have been taken in 1946, just after the end of the Second World War. Story goes that the person in this photo is a soldier who had just returned home from war, which would already be difficult and challenging enough, but as he returned home, he came to hear the news that unfortunately, despite his survival, his family had lost their lives during the war. There is no doubt about the impact that either world war had on the world, and how the impact doesn't stop once the war is over. These wars change changed the course of history, and they changed people's lives forever. This is definitely a difficult photo to look at, and it's an eerie reminder of those dark times. In our number 6 spot today, we have the disguise. Speaking of the Second World War, as it began to come to a close, many of the Germans who were involved in all of the many violations of human rights began to flee or try and hide or disguise themselves for fear of being persecuted. One of those was, of course, the worst of them all, Hitler himself. This photo, or rather series of photos, was created by the US government as an attempt to document the many ways that he could have disguised himself in order to escape being recognized and captured. At the time, the fear of him being able to escape responsibility and go on living his life abroad was very real. I mean, there have been others who actually did manage to do just that, and that is exactly the reason for these photos. There's also something kind of interesting and bizarre about what happens when we take away the features of his that we know him by. In the end, he didn't escape and go on to live abroad, but he did escape being held responsible before the world. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Titanic. We all know the story of the Titanic. I mean, it's one of the most famous in history, and this photo comes from just before the historic iceberg encounter. On April 10th, 1912, the Titanic set sail on its maiden voyage, heading from Southampton over to New York City. The ship took a couple of stops along the way, one in France, one in Ireland, before setting off for the United States officially, and somewhere along the beginning part of its journey, someone was able to snap a photo of the ship as it sailed. It's not clear exactly where this photo was taken, but it is thought to be the last photo taken of the ship before its tragic end. Considering it was only 4 days after the ship set sail that it hit the iceberg, it is likely that this photo came not too long before the terrible day. In our number 4 spot today, we have the lipstick killer. This is a photo that comes to us from December 10th, 1945. If looking at this image gives you a shudder down your spine, that absolutely makes sense, as it was written by a terrible person known as the lipstick killer. This photo is an image of a note he left written on the wall at one of his crime scenes. The photo comes from the apartment of Frances Brown, as just before he wrote this message, he took her life. After this message was left, he ended up taking the life of one other person because he was finally caught by the police 6 months later. The message scrawled in the photo reads, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself." It is an absolutely chilling note with a horrific backstory. In our number 3 spot today, we have bad politics. This is a photo that shows the former First Lady Rosalind Carter, and you may or may not be wondering who that man next to her is, and to that I say, my friends, that is the horrible monster that is John Wayne Gacy, aka the Killer Clown. This photo was taken at a Polish Constitution Day celebration in Chicago in 1978, which is the same year that Gacy was arrested for his crimes, so at the point this photo was taken, he had already taken the lives of at least 20 people. The reason he was there and was able to meet the First Lady is because he was not only the worst of the worst, he also somehow became the Democratic precinct captain in the Chicago suburbs in the 1970s, and he was the marshal of the Polish parade. The picture is even signed, quote, "To John Gacy, best wishes, Rosalind Carter." It's terrible. I hate it so much. I feel very bad for anyone who had to meet him. In our number 2 spot today, we have the first day. This is a photo that shows Dorothy Count Scoggins as she joined her new school. What should be a perfectly normal activity was certainly anything but for Dorothy, as she was the first black person to attend Harding High School in Charlotte, North Carolina, which was previously an all-white school. After the passing of the Purcell Plan in 1956, there were 40 students who applied for transfers, and Dorothy was one of 4 who was accepted. This photo clearly shows that although small steps were being taken within the law to prevent segregation, there were no steps being taken within the students. As Dorothy just tries to get an education, you can see her peers clearly trying to disturb her peace. After 4 days of this kind of treatment, Dorothy's parents ended up withdrawing her from the school over fears for her safety. These images, however, were seen around the world. This photo acts as quite the reminder for where we were really not all that long ago. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Challenger crew. This is a photo that was taken of the clearly very excited Challenger crew as they walked down the ramp ready to head off on their mission. The crew even included 37-year-old Krista McAuliffe, who was a high school social studies teacher. She had won a spot on this mission through a program with NASA called the Teacher in Space program, and she had trained diligently for months in order to be the first non-military person in space. On January 28, 1986, the Challenger mission proved to be fateful just 73 seconds after liftoff. 2 rubber O-rings failed because of of the cold temperatures of the morning, and on live television the world watched as the spacecraft broke apart and plunged into the ocean, sadly taking the lives of everyone on board. It is an absolutely tragic event made even more chilling by this final photo.
Starting off this countdown, we have 1930s Halloween. Who here likes Halloween? Smash that like button if you do. And also let me know what your favorite costume is that you've ever worn. Back in the 1930s, Halloween looked a lot different. Obviously, they didn't have a Party City or Spirit Halloween where they could just go to and buy a costume from. No, costumes were often homemade, which makes them look terrifying. Look at this photo. These individuals are in Halloween costumes. I'm sorry, but who are they dressed up as? The women look terrifying with those weird masks on. I would freak out if I saw someone walking down the street dressed like that on Halloween. Like, those are some next level purge masks. They seriously give me the creeps. In our ninth spot, we have the exorcism of Annalise. Annalise was a devout Catholic woman who is said to have been possessed by 5 different demons. It all started one day when she blacked out at school and began walking around all dazed. She didn't remember anything. People around her said that she was in a trance-like state. Soon, these blackouts became more frequently. Things started to get worse and she started to convulse and hallucinate randomly. Eventually, she claimed that she saw the face of the devil and could hear demons whispering in her ears. In the end, she underwent 67 exorcisms, some lasting up to 4 hours. This photo of Annalise shows you in her possessed state. It's very creepy, and her story is honestly so disturbing and scary and sad. Moving on at number 8, we have the mutated piglet. In 1986 in Ukraine, an accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant caused the reactor to explode. This explosion had lasting effects, and to this day, it's still considered the worst nuclear disaster. A lot of people and animals were affected by this. In fact, the animals that lived there in the late 1980s suffered tremendously from the nuclear waste. This is a picture of a mutated piglet. It was born with a deformity, believed to have been caused by its mother being exposed to the radiation. This pig is now on display at the Ukrainian National Chernobyl Museum. You know, in case you wanted to go and see it up close. Moving on to number 7, we have the nuclear shadow. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The bomb was so powerful that people up to a mile of it were vaporized. All that was left of them was their shadows burnt into stone. This is a creepy image that shows one of the bomb's victims. It's a silhouette of an elderly man or woman with a cane. So the bomb's light and heat were so powerful that it bleached any exposed surfaces. In this case, the person's body shielded that part on the sidewalk, and that's why an imprint was left there. All around Hiroshima, there were multiple of these body outlines. It's very disturbing and sad. It just shows their final moments alive. In our 6th spot today, we have the Stanford Prison Experiment. The Stanford Prison Experiment set out to explore the psychological effects of imprisonment. It started on August 14, 1971. A university psychology professor gathered a bunch of student volunteers and divided them into groups. 11 were assigned the role of guards and 10 were assigned the role of prisoners. It's going to be a 2-week experiment where the volunteers would play their part in a make-believe prison. But the experiment had to be ended after only 6 days. The volunteers got way into character. Some guards turned sadistic. They really exercised their power over the prisoners, whereas many prisoners became depressed and showed signs of extreme stress. The study and this creepy photo provide a chilling look at what humans are capable of. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Wild Man suit. Not only is this a dark photo from history, but it's also a very mysterious one. This suit that you're seeing is what historians named the Wild Man suit. It consists of a double-layered set of armor covered in 1-inch long iron nails. What was it used for, you may ask? Well, no one knows for sure. One popular theory is that it was used during bear hunting in the 1800s, or it was used in bear baiting. Don't know if that's true, but it looks very uncomfortable to wear. Maybe it was a twisted torture device. The executioner would wear it and then give the prisoner a nice big and tight hug. I don't know, I'm just guessing, but either way it's messed up. In our 4th spot today, we have the ruins of Hiroshima. Here is another very scary and sad photo taken after America dropped a bomb on Hiroshima. The bomb had an explosive yield equal to 15,000 tons of TNT. In fact, it destroyed 5 square miles of the city. This photo shows the ruins of the once beautiful city. Buildings and wildlife were completely destroyed by this bomb. In fact, the US remains to be the only country to ever use an atomic bomb in war. It had a huge lasting impact on the city that we should never forget about. In our third spot today, we have the Titanic. On April 15th, 1912, the infamous ship the Titanic began to sink. 1,500 passengers sank with the ship after it hit an iceberg during its maiden voyage. The few that did manage to survive fled on lifeboats. This is a picture of the last lifeboat approaching the rescue ship. You can see it was crammed with passengers as all the lifeboats were. This photo serves as a reminder of this great tragedy in history and all the innocent individuals that were impacted by this disaster. In our second spot today, we have the San Francisco earthquake of 1906. In 1906, San Francisco was hit with a massive 7.9 magnitude earthquake. It has since garnered the title of the most powerful earthquake in Northern Californian history. This earthquake not only caused homes to come crumbling down, but it also started a number of fires throughout the city. Hundreds of fires started as a result of the broken gas lines. These fires went on for 3 days, engulfing 500 city blocks. More than 3,000 people passed away from the earthquake and fires. 20,000 buildings were destroyed and 200,000 citizens were left homeless. It was very sad and tragic. This is a photo from this devastating time. This was after all the damage was done. People lined the streets and just stared at the destruction that the earthquake caused. And in our number one spot today, we have the American buffalo. Now this photo is absolutely heartbreaking. This was taken in 1892 Michigan, and that is an actual mountain made up of buffalo skulls. That means thousands of buffaloes were slaughtered. No wonder why the buffalo population is considered near threatened and are at risk for extinction. So these skulls were then ground down to be used in making bone china or refining sugar and producing fertilizer. It's said that around the end of the 18th century, there were between 30 to 60 million buffaloes on the continent. When this photo was taken, the population was at only 456. They literally slaughtered millions of buffalo. What makes it worse is that some of the buffalo were killed purposely just so that the indigenous individuals were deprived of them.
Coming in at number 10 is Anne Frank's attic. For those of you who don't know, Anne Frank was a German-born Jewish girl who kept a diary in which she documented life in hiding from 1942 to 1944 during the German occupation of the Netherlands in World War II. She wrote every day in her diary about her life from her family's hiding place in an Amsterdam attic. Her diary was eventually published, and it's now one of the world's best-known books. Now this photo is not of Anne, but of her father, Otto, in 1960, revisiting the attic where the family hid. He was the sole survivor of his family, so I can't imagine the pain he had revisiting this place. Later, the photographer Arnold Newman recalled taking this photo. He said, "The mood was depressing and I immediately began photographing him. After a few moments, the Westertoren bells next door began to ring. Those were the bells that Anne wrote about. He suddenly broke down completely, weeping uncontrollably, and then so did I. We never met again. To this day, when I lecture or tell his story to people, I find I choke up. I still can't help myself." Number 9, an inmate at the Rab camp. The Rab camp was one of several Italian concentration camps, and it was established during World War II in July 1942 on the Italian-occupied island of Rab, now in Croatia. Estimates of the Commission for Determining the Crimes of the Occupiers say 4,641 detainees died at the camp, including 800 inmates who died while being transported from Rab to other concentration camps in Italy. In July 1943, after the fall of the fascist regime in Italy, the camp was closed, but some of the remaining Jewish prisoners were deported by German forces to the extermination camps. Under Italian Army Commander Mario Rotatta's watch, the ethnic cleansing and violence committed against the Slovene civilian population included summary executions, hostage-taking and ending the hostages' lives, reprisals, and the burning of houses and villages. Slovenes and Croatians suffered from cold and hunger in open-air tents, surrounded by barbed wire fence and guarded towers. At its peak, there were up to 15,000 internees. Conditions at the camp were described as appalling, filthy, muddy, overcrowded, and swarming with insects. This photo just shows how much suffering they went through. Number 8. A jail cell from the Salem witch trials. This makeshift jail cell truly brings out the horrors of the Salem witch trials. These trials were a series of hearings and prosecutions of people accused of witchcraft in colonial Massachusetts between February 1692 and May 1693. More than 200 people were accused, 30 people were found guilty, 19 of whom were executed by hanging. Now, women vastly outnumbered men in the ranks of accused and executed. It was in cells like this one that the accused witches spent their final moments before being executed. Now, it's just sad because we all know that this was just a scare and that they weren't real witches. Many of these women were suspected and chosen because they were simply unliked.
In our 7th spot, we have The Wake. This photo was taken in around the 1920s during a wake for the man featured in the photo. Well, directly to the left of the photo by the two mourning individuals appears to be a ghostly apparition. Is this the deceased man still lingering over his body? Or is it another ghostly entity? Well, we don't know for sure. But what we do know is that this photo is very, very creepy. I mean, you can see the ghost as clear as day. Hopefully, it's just the man saying one last goodbye before going to the afterlife and not a demon. Coming in at number 6, we have the Mickey Mouse gas masks. Did you know that Walt Disney once designed a very creepy gas mask for children? Yeah. So, the use of chemical war during World War II made it so everyone would carry around a gas mask with them, just in case. So, in 1942, Mr. Disney himself invented a Mickey Mouse inspired gas mask. It was meant to calm terrified kids. Yes, I will repeat, this was meant to calm terrified kids. And clearly scare parents, because that seriously is nightmare fuel. Imagine seeing people walking around wearing those. No thank you. That's anything but comforting. Mickey looks like a demon. Anyways, with the help of the Sun Rubber Company, about 1,000 of these masks were made. They thought kids would be more inclined to wear them if they were in the shape of a fun-loving mouse. But in the end, they just turned out to be fairly creepy, like if you agree. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the expressionless. So this creepy looking mannequin thing is a dummy that nurses would use in training back in 1968. Okay, if I was a nurse and had to pretend that that was my patient, bro, I'd quit. She looks terrifying. Anyways, that's all I could find about this dummy. Like, I'm not sure if they would practice CPR on her or what. But you may recognize this photo because it inspired the creepypasta called The Expressionless. So the creepypasta is fake, but the photo and the dummy is very much real. I swear, did they purposely make the dummy terrifying to scare the nurses or what? In our 4th spot, we have Gas Mask Island. About 110 miles south of Tokyo, Japan, there's a small island called Miyakijima, otherwise known as Gas Mask Island. How did it get its name? Well, this island is home to Mount Oyama, a very active volcano that emits poisonous sulfuric gas. So all of the residents have to carry gas masks with them at all time. You know, just in case these gas levels rise unexpectedly. This photo shows the residents of the island wearing their gas masks. And I know what you're thinking. This photo looks like it came straight out of an end of the world horror movie. I agree, it's insane. You thought wearing medical masks was bad? Imagine wearing a gas mask around town. Would not be fun. Moving on to number 3, we have post-mortem photography. So back in the day, there was an interesting trend that people would follow, which was post-mortem photography, aka taking photos with a person who was recently deceased. So the woman in the middle of this photo has sadly passed away. So they did this for a number of reasons. It was a way to deal with their grief. It helped preserve the image of the loved one that passed away, and it was also a little memento. This trend became common in Victorian England when there was a rise in short lifespans for the young, which is sad. And in a way, this is a sweet way to preserve the memory of a loved one. But it's creepy. Hella creepy, you have to admit it. Coming in at number 2, we have the crucifixion. This creepy photo from 1890 Germany is of a woman who suffered from mental health issues. This was their method of treatment. They thought that this would cure her. Basically, they locked her in a cellar for 12 hours a day. For those 12 hours, she was changed up in the crucifixion pose. Apparently, this was supposed to cure her mental illness. Okay, I'm no psychologist or, doctor, but that alone would drive me insane and make everything worse. Now, this was done for a number of reasons. They thought that when you make someone pretend to be crucified, they will think, well, good thing I'm not actually being crucified. Hey, my life isn't that bad. Bingo, problem solved. No, honey, no, it does not work like that, I'm sorry. And in our number 1 spot, we have the haunting photo. Ready to not be able to sleep tonight? Take a look at this photo. This is the creepiest thing I have ever seen. This is just a normal family photo taken back in the day, but the camera quality makes them all look like ghosts. I'm sorry, but that man is not human. He's like a zombie ghost. Those eyes, don't stare into them for too long or else he's going to possess you, I swear. Even the baby looks hella creepy. They literally look like a family of ghosts or demons. They're gonna haunt me in my dreams, I swear.
Kicking off our list at number 10, the reindeer gift. We'll turn the clocks back to 1941 right off the hop. When the Germans were attacking the Soviet Union, it was of course one of the biggest attacks in history. Britain and the United States had to send over weapons, supplies, anything really just to keep them afloat, just to keep them in the fight. Now they sent these supplies through the Arctic Circle, that was the only route, but of course it was littered with U-boats, war stuff. So thankfully the British HMS Trident was there to watch the waters, and in turn the Soviets were able to fight on. As a gift, as a thank you rather, the Soviets sent the captain of the Trident, they sent him a live reindeer that the British of course had to accept because it was ill-mannered if you don't. So they had to keep a 6-foot tall, real-life living reindeer on a submarine. Must be comfortable, awesome. Imagine the smell. Her name was Pollyanna and they brought her on board through a torpedo tube. She was tiny, she's the cutest little thing. She was a crew member for 6 weeks, which is honestly hilarious because some of those guys got way too attached, for sure. She slept better than most, if I'm being honest. She shared her room in the captain's quarters. Again, imagine the smell. I don't know, is it worth it? I've always wanted a baby goat growing up, so this is kind of the closest thing. I'm jealous, I'm weirdly jealous. Number 9, Stalin Photoshop. Deep fakes are getting out of hand. I have no idea what's real or what's fake anymore. To be honest, I'm not even Taylor. I'm actually Olivia doing a list right now, but it's been deep faked so well that you believe it. Modern technology is really making it hard to tell what's real and what's not, but it goes back. Back in 1939, a photo of Stalin was published, and he looks normal. He actually looks kind of great. Some would say he looks way too good. You know what I mean? He was touching up photos as far back as 1939, just airbrushing, just digitally removing all those zits and stuff. Like really? That far back? But even if you got a photo with Stalin, there's a chance that you yourself would be digitally removed. Like Nikolai Yevtsov, for example, the leader of the NKVD. He was in a photo with Stalin, but around 1937, Nikolai was responsible for orders that had over 1 million people arrested. So it wasn't ideal to be in a photo with Nikolai at the time. So he was denounced, imprisoned, and he died in 1940. So Stalin had him digitally erased and replaced in a photo. That's pretty hilarious. I don't know, this man was ahead of his time via Photoshop. How did he do it? How did they do it? No one knows. Number 8, Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. Nice, I remember this one. I heard about this on LimeWire. That was cool. Heard about that at full volume. This was a huge presidential scandal. Back when didn't happen every other week and stuff, this was a big deal. It was 1998 and Clinton's White House intern Monica Lewinsky was 22 years old at the time. Yeah, young. When you think back to all this old history, you're like, oh, they were this. No, very young, extremely young. They had a from 1995 to 1997, despite what LimeWire told us. Lewinsky said she hooked up with Bill 9 different times at the White House, and apparently, according to her schedule, Hillary Clinton was at the White House for at least 7 of those times. She's like, what's going on in there, huh? Is that who is that?
Number 7. Pyramids on the moon. In 1972, this image was taken by Apollo 17 during its flight to the moon near an area known as Geophone Rock. NASA listed the image as blank, but after retouching the photo, you can see that it's not completely blank. Turning up the contrast, a pyramidal structure can be seen. So, what is it? Was it some malfunction of the camera, or is there actually a pyramid on the moon? NASA has never given a credible version of the issue, which has led to some speculations about what actually can be on the moon, hidden from the public. And listen, not to be a crazy conspiracy theorist, but maybe it is true that aliens built the pyramids on Earth as they look like they did it on the moon too. I don't know, but it gives you a lot to think about. While this eye looks like it may belong to a scary monster, it's actually a human eye. While rummaging through photographs that capture the devastating impact of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki, this photo emerged. On the 6th and 9th of August 1945, the United States detonated 2 atomic for the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, respectively. The aerial bombings together ended the lives between 129,000 and 226,000 people. Most of whom were civilians. When the detonated at 1,900 feet above the city center of Hiroshima, the subsequent explosion caused temperatures of 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit to annihilate nearly everything within 1,600 feet of blast zone. Almost anything and anyone within a mile was destroyed. And heat were so extreme that they bleached the city's exposed surfaces, except in places where an unsuspecting person shielded the building or sidewalk or bridge from the blast with their own body in their final moments alive. Now, this is what the eye of an victim plagued by an atomic rack looks like. While it had been a well-known fact that radiation causes cataracts in animals, the development of atomic cataracts in human beings was noted after the atomic in Japan. Now, it wasn't just this person who suffered from this, but many others as well. Number 5. The Babushka Lady. The woman in the brown coat, or the Babushka Lady as she was later called by the FBI, was very close to JFK when he was assassinated in Dallas. Traveling in a presidential motorcade through downtown Dallas, JFK was assassinated, hit once in the back and once in the head. Kennedy was taken to Parkland Hospital for emergency medical treatment, where he was pronounced dead 30 minutes later. Now, Lee Harvey Oswald was charged with Kennedy's assassination. He denied. Oswald then was as well soon after. These theories allege the involvement of the CIA, the Mafia, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, Cuban Prime Minister Fidel Castro, the KGB, or some combination. Now, according to eyewitnesses though, this woman, the Babushka Lady, filmed the entire thing. It's thought that from her vantage point, she may have been able to answer some critical questions about what really happened that day. However, the FBI was never able to track her down, and no one has since been able to figure out the identity of this mystery observer. Number 4. Human zoos. Yes, you might have thought that zoos were strictly for animals, but once upon a time there were human zoos, which I personally find disgusting. Now, this photo was taken in 1904, where the US government imported 1,300 indigenous Filipinos from different tribes to display at the St. Louis Exposition in 1904. Yeah, you heard that right. The government did this, but are we really that surprised? The zoos were public displays of people, usually in so-called natural or primitive state, to be seen and gawked at. These zoos were most prominent during the 19th and 20th centuries, and in the 1870s, exhibitions of so-called exotic populations became popular throughout the Western world. Human zoos could be seen in many of Europe's largest cities, such as Paris, Hamburg, London, Milan, as well as American cities such as New York City and Chicago. These people were zoo attractions among the monkeys and lizards to show off the new US possessions. These people were often bound by ropes and visitors threw peanuts at them. The treatment of these human beings was just awful. Number 3. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. The Dyatlov Pass incident was an event in which 9 Soviet hikers died in the northern Ural Mountains between February 1st and 2nd, 1959, under uncertain circumstances. This creepy photo shows the determined group traversing the harsh terrain just before they met their fate on the night of February 1st. The experienced trekking group from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, led by Igor Dyatlov, had established a camp in the Russian SFSR of the Soviet Union. Now, overnight, something caused them to cut their way out of their tent and flee the campsite while inadequately dressed for the heavy snowfall and sub-zero temperatures. Now, after the group's bodies were discovered, an investigation by Soviet authorities determined that 6 of them had died from hypothermia, while the other 3 had died by physical trauma. One victim had major skull damage, 2 had severe chest trauma, and another had a small crack in his skull. 4 of the bodies were found lying in running water in a creek, and 3 of those 4 had damaged soft tissue of the head and face, 2 of the bodies had missing eyes, 1 had a missing tongue, and 1 had missing eyebrows. Number 2. Treatment of a patient with mental illness. This 1890 photo depicts a woman forced into a crucifixion pose and facing a wall. The woman is a patient at a mental institution undergoing treatment. Now, believe it or not, forced standing was considered a legitimate part of treatment for mental illness in 19th century Germany. Now, back in the 18th and early 20th century, women were sometimes institutionalized due to their opinions and their inability to be controlled properly by a primarily male-dominated culture. There were financial incentives too, because before the passage of the Married Women's Property Act 1882, all of a wife's assets passed automatically to her husband. The men who were in charge of these women, either a husband, father, or brother, could send these women to mental institutions, stating they believed that these women were mentally ill because of their strong opinions. These men had the last say when it came to the mental health of these women, so if they believed that these women were mentally ill, or if they simply wanted to silence the voices and opinions of these women, they could easily send them to mental institutions. This is what could have happened to this woman in that photograph. Now, besides standing, practices at these asylums were dark, as they had treatments that included restraints, isolation, electroshock therapy, ice baths, forced drugging, and even lobotomies. And coming in at number 1 is mustard gas tested on American military. Mustard gas is a type of chemical warfare agent, and as a chemical weapon, mustard gas was first used in World War I. In 1943, the US Navy exposed its own sailors to mustard gas. Now, officially, the Navy was testing the effectiveness of new clothing and gas masks against the deadly gas that had proven so terrifying in the First World War. Young men were approached after 8 weeks of boot camp and asked if they wanted to participate in an experiment that would help shorten the war. Obviously, they said yes, but they didn't know what they were signing up for. Only when the boys reached the research laboratory were they told the experiment involved mustard gas. Now, the participants, almost all of whom suffered several external and internal burns, were ignored by the Navy and in some cases were threatened with the Espionage Act. In 1991, the reports were finally declassified and taken before Congress.